Right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for registering and attending this webinar on relatively short notice. We wanted to provide an opportunity uh, to make you aware of an RFP opportunity for implementing some legislation that was passed this past year. DOE has released an RFP for that. But before I get too far into that, I'm going to hand it over to Casey McPherson to provide an overview of what we're working on. And just to introduce myself real quick, I'm Scott Williamson. I'm the land use and water planner with the Department of Local Affairs, and I'm helping with this RFP process. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Casey to give us background and context.
Thanks, Scott. Hello, everyone. Casey McPherson, Senior Planner in DOLA's Division of Local Government. And I'm excited to be meeting with you all. Oh yeah, that's seeing your screen, Scott. We're coordinating, as Scott mentioned. Today it was set up very quickly because we are very aware of the short turnaround, not only in the timeline of the work that we're going to be discussing, but in this RFP and proposal process itself, especially recognizing that the question submission date is coming up so quickly. We'll get into all of that, but by way of background on what we're launching, we'll go to the next slide. We are working to implement 5 bills, now laws, that passed from this last legislative session: residential occupancy limits, minimum parking, ADUs, TOCs, affordable housing. Some of them are more involved than others, but there's just quite a scope of work. We recognized, speaking of scopes, that while these are distinct laws, there's a lot of overlap, not only in who they apply to, but in some of the tools, especially between 174, 1313, as I'm sure is clear by the way that we organize the RFP itself, which is, Scott will dive into that, but I'll just say 3 scopes that you'll notice focus much more on the tools that need to be developed across laws rather than scopes for each law. So we just launched today our engagement process to start getting some good feedback on these tools, especially for the early out stuff with subject jurisdictions and interest groups listed in the legislation. But we also are working to procure consultant services to support all of this work. So that brings us to the purpose of today. And Scott, I will hand it back over to you to take us through the rest.
That's great. And thanks, everybody. So the main audience for our webinar today is really focused on interested firms, but I know several of you may be coming from local government and are curious and listening in, and that's absolutely fine. And if you have some trusted firms that you've worked with, feel free to pass on this opportunity as well. But I just wanted to make that clear from the outset. As Casey mentioned, this our approach with this RFP and the 3 scopes of work is really intended to be a coordinated and efficient multi-bill engagement and implementation effort. The idea with that is we're asking in each of these laws, local governments are being asked to do something. And so we want to have the audience of local governments in mind at the end of the day. So if we can do some back-end work on our end to make sure we can line up across laws and set up a engagement process that works for local governments, we're happy to do that extra work. And also an important note from the beginning here, the legislation contains some very tight timelines. So you'll notice, for example, I'll get to a future slide, but our first due date for questions on this RFP opportunity is August 26th, and that's in 3 days. So the reason for that is we're looking at that end date, the end date in mind for getting consultants on board, and that's so we can meet some deadlines, some due dates for early deliverables, so that we can hit the due dates that the legislature gave us in Colorado. We divided the tasks here into 3 scopes of work in this RFP opportunity. And the scopes are grouped according to general subject area and also where we thought consultant expertise would fit. We have lumpers and splitters, but we tried to do our best in terms of fitting where your expertise may come in. There is one separate scope of work that may interact with uh, these scopes of work, and that's the housing needs assessment methodology. And that's on a separate track, but it may end up, coming back and rejoining that effort. But just wanted to make you aware of that. That housing needs assessment methodology is not part of this RFP. So I alluded to the RFP timeline. So we published the RFP on August 21st. Questions are due at 2 p.m. on the 26th. We'll turn around and get answers posted on that by the end of the day, 5 p.m. on August 28th. So you have an idea as you're putting together your proposal of what's some answers to those questions. And the response submission are due on September 11th at 2 p.m. We've carved out a little time on the evaluator team's schedule to make sure if it makes sense to be able to do consultant interviews on September 18th. And then we're hoping to have a contract fully executed for these on October 4th so that work can start on October 7th. Tight timeline. The three scopes of work are as following. And one thing I will mention here is that this webinar will focus really on content. If you have questions on, some of the nitty-gritty questions around, submitting a proposal, the format to submit it in, things like that, definitely share those questions. I'll send you Brenda Luhan's email on the final slide here. But the content in this webinar will really focus on these content pieces, if that makes sense. So the three distinct scopes of work in the RFP are planning for housing, compliance and review, and then the third scope is a combination of strategic growth and natural lands reports. There's also an element around providing guidance for local governments on including water supply elements and strategic growth elements in their comprehensive plans. Again, we felt like consultant expertise likely matched, in one of these areas for you, hopefully. But you may bid on one, two, or all three scopes of work. And certainly we welcome and in some cases encourage a collaborative approach if you have multiple firms you want to work with. So a little bit about the tasks under each scope of work. So for the planning for housing tasks, the first task will be around displacement risk assessment guidance and development of a mitigation strategies directory. And this is the first due date of any of the scopes of work. And the first deliverable would be October 18th. So keep that in mind. And that's to ensure we have a robust engagement process around this. The legislation, which is Senate Bill 174 from last year, actually explicitly called for focus groups of traditionally under-consulted groups. So we want to make sure that we're really doing justice to that approach. And so that's the reason for a stepwise approach to that. And the due date for the displacement risk assessment guidance and statute is December 31st, so the end of the year. The second task is affordability and displacement mitigation menus or directory. They're referred to differently and the different laws that were passed last year. So we can use those interchangeably between menus and directory. The third task is around ADUs. There was a bill passed for encouraging ADUs in certain subject jurisdictions. And for that, we'll have an ADU toolkit, strategy list, and technical assistance. Fourth task would be housing action plans, template, and guidance. And that, again, that's where we'll want to pull in that a housing needs assessment as background material to that process. And then housing expertise and technical assistance is another key piece. And this is where we'd be looking for additional support to complement what technical assistance DOLA would already be providing. And DOLA, for those of you from out of state, is the Department of Local Affairs in Colorado. And then the second scope of work is around compliance and review. So for that, a big part of that will be preparing what we're calling form and manner templates. And so the legislation, the laws provide for DOLA to create, to define the form and manner in which we would like different reports submitted from local governments. And so that would be a big first task. And the first deliverable for that is January 17th. That's so that we have those templates to provide to local governments by the end of February of 2025, as in many cases is dictated in statute now. The second will be around policies and procedures support. That's around some things that are a little more involved in statute that require a little more guidance beyond just a simple template. And then the third task is, again, coming back to that ADU bill. That would be accessory dwelling unit, supportive jurisdiction reports, and that would be both creating a template and providing some review of those. And then we've broken in for this task 4, we've broken out a review step. So once we get reports back from local governments, we'd want the firm who is in charge of these tasks to support DOLA, particularly in those times in which we get a high volume. Maybe we're around a due date for these reports, and we'll just need some additional support for reviewing different reports. And then similarly on number 5 there, developing a template for minimum parking requirement that is imposed or enforced by local government. So there was a minimum parking bill that was passed into law last year. And one of the provisions of that is local governments can enforce a parking requirement under certain conditions, and there needs to be sort of an assessment of impact before they do that. And again, this is applying to specific areas within specific subject jurisdictions. So in that case, we'd need a template for that report from local governments, and then we'd be asking for support and review. And then the 6th task here is an optional task, and that's for additional GIS and other technical support for development of local housing opportunity goal calculations. And these are in transit-oriented communities within a certain area around transit. And there's certainly more to catch up on in the legislation, and happy to answer specific questions around that, either here or as follow-up. And then finally, this third scope of work is around strategic growth and the natural lands reports. And again, this also includes that comprehensive plan guidance. I'll walk through each task again here for clarity. So the first deliverable here, these are a little bit later. The due dates are provided in the legislation are a little later than some of the others. And most of these fall under Senate Bill 174 that was passed last year. So the first deliverable is end of the year, and that's for a scope, a finalized scope for the statewide strategic growth report. DOLA and our partner state agencies have a pretty good sense of the steps involved in developing this report, but we certainly want a consultant expertise on that, and then also we'll want some engagement with local governments and other experts as we sort of refine the approach. So that finalized scope will be end of the year. Second task, Natural and Agricultural Interjurisdictional Opportunities Report. Now this one, a lot of work has already been done around the kind of the subject areas for this report, and this will be building on some literature review that DOLA and others have already done to pull together state, regional, local reports that relate to preservation and connectivity of priority lands and landscapes. More detail in the RFP and scope of work on this one, but this one, again, will be kind of repackaging information that has been provided and really with a local government and regional government audience in mind. Step number 3 here, task number 3 is the neighborhood center designation guidance. And this is a real key piece of the statewide strategic growth report, also a key piece of strategic growth elements and comprehensive plans. So we would be looking for support from the consultant in fleshing out this guidance. And then guidance for strategic growth elements and comprehensive plans. There is a lot in that Senate Bill 174 around what analysis local governments need to do to assess certain lands in their jurisdiction for infill opportunities, and then kind of compare those against more greenfield development opportunities and the associated infrastructure development and maintenance cost of those. So there's quite a bit in the legislation to refer to for interested consultants. Similarly, on task number 5, for water supply elements and comprehensive plans, there are specific requirements in the legislation. And there's also, particularly in Colorado, a lot of work that's already been done to develop guidance for water supply elements and comprehensive plans. So really what we would be targeting in this would be examples of sort of baseline components and then sort of best in class examples of water supply elements. And then finally, we decided to pull out separately this stakeholder and public engagement task so that the engagement process can look across these different deliverables and try, because we're going to, again, be asking so many of the same people or jurisdictions to weigh in on some of these different pieces. We wanted to be cognizant of that and really encourage the firm who will be working on this to think across those tasks when developing that public engagement plan and that stakeholder engagement plan. Quick note, this is the evaluation criteria in the RFP, or at least the broad categories for them. Generally, approach and framework, we've weighted most highly. We want to know that the firm has a strong understanding and efficient and compelling approach to the work, and that the firm also has, in this second bullet, content expertise and demonstrated experience. So that's the next most highly rated. In particular, we would be encouraged by firms that have experience working in the Western United States and in Colorado, particularly around some of those natural resources related content. Business entity capacity is another category, and then budget and proposed fee schedule relationship to identified deliverables. So that connection between the budget that you submit and the tasks and subtasks will be something that evaluation committee will be looking at. And if you want to look for more, there's actually more details for where we would look for evidence for each of these things in the RFP evaluation methodology section that goes into some depth. And then really kind of a final piece in this section, particularly for those questions around, process for submittal, things like that. Questions and clarifications should go to Brenda Lujan, and her email is right there. Casey and I are on the webinar today to really provide that overview of more of the content of this work. And then again, those questions and clarifications regarding the RFP will be accepted until the 26th at 2 p.m. And any questions that we answer here, we'll make sure to copy for and include in that response. And then you can continue to monitor the Colorado Vendor Self-Service website and BidNet website for those Q&A documents. And we're striving and we estimate that those would be posted no later than August 28th.